now. And thirdly, we do encourage all guests to do stay on mute. If you had a comment or a question, please utilize the chat feature, or you can also use the reactions if you want to show your support. Okay, so this is the event schedule. So today we will be doing introductions and opening remarks, and then I'm going to pass it off to our guest speaker. We'll do about a 40-minute lecture about some learnings about Black Canadian history. We will have a Q&A, a group discussion, and then we'll get into our closing remarks. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic off to Rito, who is our guest of the hour.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Thanks a lot for this introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you all tonight, this evening. And today we'll go over some of our Black Canadian history. Obviously, you guys know it is almost impossible to go over 300-400 years of history within 40 minutes. So if any given time, if you have questions afterwards, please feel free to ask. You know, if you feel like we haven't talked about your specific region, it's no shade. It's and there's nothing wrong with it. Where you can ask all the questions that you want afterwards. And also, in the meantime, even if some of the regions that I won't talk about, I can also elaborate on them. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Hold on, I just want to make sure that we did try with permission. Okay, you guys see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so we did the land acknowledgement already. So Black history and Canadian history, right? Obviously we acknowledge the land, so we can save some time on that. Yeah, so when we talk about Black Canadian history per se, it starts with, the person that we consider the first Black Canadian, the first recorded Black person to set foot in Canada. And I stress the fact that I say recorded because, of course, history goes as far as we can remember, or it's been, recorded. Matthew DaCosta, first registered Black person, educated man, spoke multiple languages: Dutch, Portuguese, indigenous language of Mi'kmaq, Pidgin Basque, Spanish, French, of course. His roots, he is rooted in the Kingdom of Congo, but as known as with his Portuguese name. He is the first Black person registered in the history of Canada. He's the one that would introduce Samuel de Champlain to the Mi'kmaq, chief Mi'kmaq member too. So they arrived here early 1600s. And I think it's really important to understand, right? There we have it at the catalyst of, or at the genesis of this country that we now call Canada, excuse me. You have a Black man or an African or more that introduces an indigenous person to a European. Obviously, we know history is not so sweet. So we don't want to praise the outcome, but we want people to understand that, we've been here from the get-go. I think that's what it's all about when it comes to talking about Matthew DaCosta. And of course, Samuel de Champlain would go on to found Quebec City in 1608, which is the oldest. And again, everything that I say in terms of the dates, the names, everything is from a colonial standpoint. It is the oldest founded city in north of Mexico, in North America. So 1608. So at the catalyst of the country that will be known as Canada, we have a Black man that introduces an indigenous person to a European, a French Catholic European. And as we're moving forward in history, we come across a young boy that, history will remember as Olivier Lejeune. Olivier Lejeune, it says that, he's from Madagascar or West Africa, which, when you hear Guinea, when you go in the archives and you see Guinea, most of the time it could be Senegal, it could be Gambia, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and so on. He's the first actually enslaved person of African descent to live in Canada. He's the first Black person to permanently live, the first person of African descent to go to school here, to go to prison here, to be buried here as well. And again, history will remember Olivier Lejeune as the first enslaved person of African descent as well. I want to show you some of the archives that I got from, Marcel Trudel, which is, a French-Canadian historian that extensively researched the presence of people of African descent or slavery in the early 20th century. So he went back all the way to, the Jesuits archives of Paul Lejeune. And I'll translate for you guys. It says, a Negro at Guillaume Couillard. And Guillaume Couillard, okay, I will explain to you afterwards who Guillaume Couillard is. The first enslaved that we can identify in Canada, French Canada, is a little Negro brought to Quebec City by the Kirk brothers in 1629. He came from Madagascar, or other versions would say Guinea. It doesn't matter because there's a whole continent between those two countries. Belonging to one of the three Kirk brothers, the little Negro was sold to about 50 EQ, which is roughly about $2,000 today, to a French merchant, Le Bailly, which was, considered a trader. He was working with the British, the English. In July 1632, when the British seized their occupation of Quebec City, the trader Le Bailly gifted the little Negro to Guillaume Couillard. Now, the reason why I also want you guys to understand some of the history, because, at times, when you hear about Quebec history, it feels like, Quebec, it's its own thing. Trust, being living in this province, at times we almost feel like, okay, we are not allowed to express our Black experience. However, it is important or imperative to understand that this Black experience, this Black Canadian experience, starts with Olivier Lejeune as an enslaved person who permanently lives here, and Guillaume Couillard is the ancestor of our past Prime Minister, Philippe Couillard. He was the Prime Minister 2 prime ministers ago. His new master put him at the Jesuit school, the Jesuit Lejeune. The missionary wrote in 1632, I became regent, so teacher, in Canada. I had the other day a little savage on one side, so an indigenous, and a Negro or a nigger on another, or more on the other, to whom I was teaching the letters. After so many years of regency or teachings, I'm finally back to the ABCs, but with enchantment and satisfaction so great that I wouldn't trade my two students for the greatest audience in France. Thus, this is how Father Lejeune inaugurated the teachings of the Jesuits in the St. Lawrence Valley, having for first students a savage and a Negro. So I want you guys to understand too, when we're talking about, Black history, Black Canadian history, Afro-Canadian history, this is the genesis, right? That's how the school system starts in Canada, with two enslaved people and one Indigenous and one African. They go to school here, and afterwards, the Jesuits will have students, French Canadian students. So, again, these are some of the omitted parts of our history. And again, we can talk more about it afterwards if you guys do have questions. I'm going to move forward with the presentation, but I want you guys to understand what has taken place with Olivier Lejeune and Matthew da Costa and Olivier Lejeune, which are two different situations. Moving forward, again, I want you guys to understand the Black Code was established in the French colonies, because when we're talking about Canada, early days of Canada, it is a French colony. It's known as New France, Nouvelle France. It is a French colony, along with, Martinique, Guadeloupe, not Martinique, but Guadeloupe, Saint-Domingue, Haiti, and so on, Louisiana, definitely. And this is the fleur de lis, which represents the national symbol of Quebec nowadays, which used to be branded on enslaved people that, would try to run away from their homes, throughout the French colonies. And that happened here in Canada as well, because if it happened in Quebec, it happened in Canada, definitely. As we're moving forward, Marie-Joseph Angélique, she's a symbol of, one of our first people that is known to maybe have sparked or wanted to spark a rebellion. We don't have any proof that she set the city on fire, but she was accused, excuse me, of setting the city on fire on April 10th, 1734. A lot of sources say she was wrongfully accused, used as a scapegoat for an economy that wasn't doing too good at that time. Again, a young colony, early Canadian colony of Ville Marie, which didn't really have a strong economy. It had many floods and fires. And on April 10th, Marie-Joseph Angélique was actually accused of setting that fire. She was tortured. In the process of her being tortured, they also cut her leg off. She was hanged. Then they burn her, spread the ashes in the wind. Her story resurfaced early 20th centuries. If you want more information, there's a book written by Dr. Afua Cooper. It's called The Hanging of Marie-Joseph Angélique. Very, very, very good book, because it also talks about the fact that if she did set the fire, then this was an act of rebellion, and this might have been the last thing that she intentionally did before she was caught trying to escape, quote unquote. She was born in on the west coast of Africa, in Madeira, which is a Portuguese department. She was sold into a slave market in Lisbon. She was brought to around upstate New York and New England, depending on the sources, by a Dutch merchant, Nicolas Back, and she was brought by French Canadian François Poulain de Francheville, with whom she arrived in Montreal in the 1720s. Then hence how she received the name Angélique. Of course, Angélique was also forced to breed. She had two infant children that died early on. She was forced to marry another enslaved African, Jacques César. Yeah, very, very tumultuous life. She befriended or fell in love with, a Caucasian man by the name of Claude Thibault, with whom she had dreams of escaping. And sources say that Claude Thibault might have been the person that set her up with the fire. Now, I wasn't there. I don't have any source. Hopefully not. But listen, if she did start a rebellion, because we know arson was also a tool of rebellion in many, communities in those days, right? This would have been what Denmark Vesey wanted to do. This would have been what Nat Turner wanted to do. This would have been what was done in Haiti, and this would have been what was done in different parts of the Caribbean, or what they attempted to do. So it is not. It's definitely not far fetched. Again, this is an archive from her trial. You see here it's written in cursive. Mon avis, okay, my advice is that the Negro wench had to be condemned to make a man coupe. So they wanted her to have her wrist cut off. So she did. She appealed the case. Obviously, she was still executed. Um, Again, we're moving forward. In the 1760s, the British conquest arrives. Again, it's the British conquest arrives of Canada. Now turns into a British colony. We see the big province of Quebec, the Hudson Bay Company, which now the province of Quebec would have been the Great Lakes, all the states of Michigan, Ontario, Quebec. So it's a big piece of land. Article 47 says that even though the British conquered the French, the Negroes and the Pawnee. So the Pawnee would be a pejorative term to designate an indigenous person that was enslaved. Obviously, it wasn't pejorative at first. It came from the tribe, the Pawnee tribe. But afterwards, it became the word to designate an enslaved person that would be an indigenous that was enslaved. Now it says the Negroes and the Pawnees on both sexes will stay in the quality of slaves in the possession of the French and Canadian to whom they belong. It'll be their choice if they want to keep them at their service in the colony or sell them, and also they can continue to raise them in the religion of their choices, which is the Catholic religion in that sense. Accepted, those will be made war prisoners, of course. So Article 47 from the British conquest is really interesting because it shows us an actual, social hierarchy that has been established where you have the British conqueror, the French, the conquered French, and you have indigenous and African enslaved people. Obviously, the French, the conquered French, will not pay attention to the fact that they're slave owners. They would actually see that, oh my God, the British now they've taken our land, they've taken out, they invaded us. However, because of the level of the dehumanization that these enslaved people are going through, we don't even see them as human beings that are still working for us. So yeah, and I say working, I'm enslaved people working. And again, with the British conquest, we'll see the arrival of what people that we would call the loyalists. So obviously, the loyalists are, the people, the ones that wanted to stay loyal to the British Crown. They arrive in southern Ontario, all the way in Ontario. They arrive in the Maritimes, for sure, most definitely New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. They arrive in southern Quebec as well, eastern townships as well. But if we want to talk about Black history in that sense, talking about the loyalists, we have to talk about the Black loyalists, and we talk about Nova Scotia, right? So the Black loyalists were approximately 3,000 African American supporters of the British. And again, I say supporters because they fought on the British side. They were given a choice to fight on the British side, but supporters of the British during the American Revolution. Uh, it's a strong word, but they definitely were brought to British Canada at the end of the conflict and settled in the Maritimes in Nova Scotia. They were given land that was not fertile. So the land that they were given in Nova Scotia was not fertile, and the land that they were promised as well, they did not have access to it. But at some point, it was the largest concentration of Black residents in Canada, and what was at the time the largest settlement of free Blacks outside of Africa. So this is in the 1780s. So in the 1780s, we have yet to have large concentration of free Black settlements outside of Africa. We have yet to have a Haitian Revolution. We have yet to have a New Orleans Revolution. We have yet to have. We did have the Columbus in Brazil. We did have Yangar in Mexico, but nothing as much as far as 3,000 free Black people living in one place all at once. And we look at some of those settlements. You guys could see Birchtown, Shelburne, Halifax, Preston, North Preston, East Preston, Sydney. And Shelburne at some point would have been the city with the most black people in Canada, historically speaking. Hence, what also led to the Shelburne riots. So the Shelburne riots is really interesting because it is considered the first racial riots in the first racial riots in North America. On July 26, 1784, right, a mob of loyalists. Again, when we talk about loyalists, we're talking about the white settlers that left, the continental America for the British North America, right? They arrived here, and it was said that when the black loyalists came here, because they couldn't find any jobs, they couldn't find work, they accepted to work for less than minimum wage, especially living, having or owning lands that was not so fertile. They ended up working for less than minimum wage, which led to a lot of unhappy white loyalists at that time who said that uh, these Negroes came to steal their jobs. Now, stealing the jobs was one thing. However, it was Pastor David George. Pastor David George would have been, he was a pastor, and they had a church, of course. The riot really started when he baptized this white woman, right? Because some of the white folks started to attend, some of the black churches. You know how we worship. You guys know how it is. And Pastor David George, when he baptized that white lady, as the riot really started, and it was looting and rioting this black settlement. Um, and that the Shelburne riots is really interesting because we don't often hear about it. It happened early on in our history, and not only we don't hear about it, we don't even think about the fact that we don't even fathom the fact that here in Canada, the first racial riot in North America happened here because of the condition of the black people having to work for less than minimum wage, being cornered into accepting certain jobs that they would not have done. Let's say the conditions would have been better, and that led to the level of uncontempt or unhappiness from the white loyalists who, yeah, stormed and mobbed and looted those black settlements. Yeah, yeah. Again, so you guys see Shelburne. Uh, the black community arrived there in 1783 when they left from New York City. Again, we're flowing throughout history. I know that in between the black loyalists and in between the black pioneers of British Columbia, a lot of things happened. No, this is not what we want to focus on. I want you guys to also understand that this is also about highlighting key moments in history, but we can definitely talk about much broader history afterwards. The Black Pioneers, I think it's also really interesting. In early 1858, at least 4 shiploads of Black Californians, dubbed the Black Pioneers, left for freedom in British Columbia. A year later, during the Pig War, 800 people had migrated to freedom on Vancouver Island. So Vancouver Island also has a deep Black history that is not being talked about. These freedom seekers have been invited to British Columbia by Governor Douglas, Sir James Douglas, a man of Afro-Scottish ancestry, who sought loyal citizens to help him retain power during the Fraser River Gold, so during the Gold Rush. Um, Sir James Douglas is also really, really interesting when we're talking about, he is the first governor of, Vancouver Island and then British Columbia. He's an Afro descendant. It may not look like it, or it may look like it. You may have family members that he's an Afro descendant. His mother was a Creole from Barbados. His mother was half white. His father was Scottish. He was born in Guyana, and he was raised in Scotland. He worked as a fur trader, worked for the Northwest Company, the Hudson's Bay Company as well, and he was giving a mandate to go and populate or settle the northwestern part of Canada, or the western part of Canada for that matter. And while being there, Sir Jim Douglas was in search of immigrants who would have been sympathetic. And again, I use the word sympathetic. I think it's just people looking for better opportunity. Sympathetic is a strong word, but yes, who would have been sympathetic to Britain? So he reached out to the black community in San Francisco, and a lot of these people ended up coming here from California. So California has a strong link to BC in that sense because historically, throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, a lot of the black community that left California, whether it's for a lack of better opportunity or maybe to go and meet family members, ended up in southern British Columbia. So whether it be Victoria, whether it be Vancouver, Vancouver Island, and so on. And you could even see it in the 20th century. You could see people such as what you call my brother, left-handed guitar. Oh man, I'm gonna kill myself for that. No disrespect. But yes, he was raised in Jimi Hendrix. Excuse me. He was raised in Vancouver. His family came from Seattle, and that was a family also that settled to Seattle from California. Um, and we also have, the Victoria Rifles. Again, um, I find, when it comes to Black history, British Columbia is one of those places that it's forgotten. Nowadays, we do talk about Hogan's Alley. The Hogan's Alley's conversation has resurfaced, but it is forgot. It is a forgotten aspect of our history as Black Canadians that we don't often get to talk about. And in the 1850s and 60s, you do have a strong Black community that arrived in Canada. Uh, one of the reasons, or one of the factors that made them come to Canada would have been the Underground Railroad, right? So, what is the Underground Railroad? It is a secret network of abolitionists. And again, when we say abolitionists, we're talking about, not just fugitives, not just people who are running away. We're talking about, allies, like the quote unquote, the white people that we would call allies that would hide the fugitives in their homes, that would help them, that would give them shelter, that would give them, I don't know whether it's ammunitions, weapons, or, maps. Um, they helped African Americans escape slavery in the southern United States. So at first, when people escaped slavery, they went to the northern states until 1850, until the Fugitive Slave Act. So the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 gave power to the slave owners, or which were considered the slave masters at that time, gave them power to go and reclaim their possessions in the northern states. So it meant that if you were someone, a fugitive or an African American fugitive that left, let's say you left, I don't know, you left Georgia and you made it to Boston, now they were allowed to go after you in Boston to reclaim you as their possession. So the Underground Railroad ended up being the largest anti-slavery freedom movement in North America. It brought between 30 to 40,000 fugitives to Canada and Mexico, because some people did go south as well. Um, Again, in the map here, you get to see most of the people that left, the southern states, ended up in southern Ontario, right? Obviously, we know about Harriet Tubman. Uh, we know about everything that took place in Baltimore and in the DMV in Virginia. A lot of people left. They went to Niagara Falls. They went to St. Catharines. They went to Chatham. They went to Buxton. Ontario, in that sense, would have been the haven. Ontario would have been, at that time, it was known as Canada West. Ontario would have been the place where a lot of African Americans ended up living because they knew of family members that went there. And also the movement, the Underground Railroad movement, also in their imaginary, when they followed the North Star. So the North Star would have been, Canada. And I also want to say something about, the North Star, right? Because in the Middle Age, when Mensa Musa made it from Mali Empire, all the way to Mecca, um, in his court, he had, scientists that they traveled throughout the desert with astro navigation. And even prior to Mensa Musa making it from Mali to Mecca, his predecessor, Abubakar too, traveled from Mali and from, like, I guess Senegambia nowadays, from Senegal, Gambia to Brazil, landed in Brazil in 1311, 1312. They use astro navigation. So astro navigation is using the stars. You get to see the Big Dipper, using the stars to know how to situate yourself in a certain environment, especially at night. And it's really interesting because at that time, during the Underground Railroad, a lot of the fugitives, enslaved fugitives, used astro navigation to make it to southern Ontario. Obviously, some people made it to Nova Scotia, Halifax, the Maritimes. Definitely, some people made it to Montreal, which would have been the last stop at that time. But most people left. And again, people also made it to the prairies. Don't get me wrong. But most people that left made it to southern Ontario. And there you have Fugitive Slave Act, read and ponder, which disregards all ordinary securities of personal liberty, which tramples on Constitution by its denial. So the Fugitive Slave Act also went as far as the people coming to, of like slave owners coming to Canada in order to claim their possessions. That happened on a lot of occasions. The occasion that we know about would have been John Anderson, Anderson he was accused of killing a slave master in Louisville, Kentucky, and he ended up coming to Toronto. Um, Obviously the name Anderson would have been the name he had given himself when he arrived in Canada. And John Anderson, afterwards, when they came to Canada to claim him, when his family, the slave master's family came, or the police or the authorities came to claim him, he left Toronto and moved to Montreal. So that's just one of the interesting stories about, you know, um, the people that made it through the Underground Railroad. But again, you could kind of have a feel for these people that are taking courage, singing gospel songs, Negro spirituals as we call them. Take courage, my soul, and let me journey on. So, though the night is young and I'm far from him, I'm far from home. Thanks be to God, the morning light appears. Storm is passing over. Marianne Shad, Marianne Shad too. She's I guess no, I don't guess. Marianne Shad would have been one of those people that she's the first Black woman to start the first Black newspaper in Canada. And not just the first Black woman, the first Black person to start a newspaper in Canada as well, called it Provincial Freedom. Marian Shad was enslaved, or she came from an enslaved family from Virginia. They made it through the Underground Railroad. And while she was here, she was an activist. She was a prominent activist in not just Southern Ontario, but also she was still active in the United States. Because after the Fugitive Slave Act had been abolished, a lot of people, a lot of enslaved people, a lot of fugitives, a lot of ex-enslaved fugitives ended up going back to the United States. Some of them stayed, but you do have, Marianne Shad, Elijah McCord, even Harriet Tubman who went back and forth. So you do have a lot of people who transited back and forth between Southern Ontario and the DMV area, specifically DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And Marianne Shad, nowadays she's known not just as a Black activist, not just as the first Black woman editor, the first Black publisher, but she's also known as, as a strong Black, figure, strong Black woman that made sure that her voice was heard, right? So she was an Afro-feminist even before the term was known. So Marianne Shad, we have a school here called the Shad Academy named after her. And what's really interesting is that in the school that was named Shad Academy is also where we had our first Black principal, which was a woman in the 70s. Her name is Gwen Lloyd, Marianne Shad in Southern Ontario. And, as we're moving forward, we're moving forward to the early 20th century. When we talk about the early 20th century in Canada specifically, there's something to be said about the fact that I talked about, what took place in Quebec. I talked about what took place in BC, in Nova Scotia. We talked a little bit about Ontario. And again, everything that we're doing is really scratching the surface. Obviously, in the early 20th century, in 1911, the premier, which his name is Wilfrid Laurier, Mr. $5 bills, had tried to pass a law in order to stop people from the Negro race to immigrate to Canada. And I'm going to read for you guys at the Government House at Ottawa, present His Excellency in Council. His Excellency in Council, in virtue of the provisions of subsection C of Section 38, the Immigration Act, is pleased to order, and it is hereby ordered as follows. For a period of 1 year from and after the date hereof, the lending in Canada shall be, and the same is prohibited of any immigrants belonging to the Negro race, which race is deemed unsuitable to the climate and requirements of Canada. Now, as you guys can see, we've been here for the past 400 years. So this is nothing new. I guess at the time you would say 300 years. This is anything new to see Black people living here. In the late 19th centuries, you had in Calgary and in the prairies, for example, you had John Ware, which settled in Calgary. John Ware would have been the person that brought the cowboy culture in Calgary. And it's really interesting because nowadays you go to Calgary, you go July, late June or early July, you go for Stampede. Everyone is like just rooted in the cowboy culture. They have no idea this really came or was popularized by a Black man that was born enslaved. That actually fled or made it to southern Alberta, and nowadays brought a culture. And in Alberta you have a culture of a lot of Black cowboys in those days that is really, really fascinating and interesting. However, when we're talking about the early 20th centuries, the early 20th century is really interesting because we're also talking about Again, another migration movement from a lot of black farmers from Oklahoma and from the Midwest who settled in the prairies. They settled in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And one cannot talk about the early 20th centuries without talking about the sleeping car porters, right? So who are these porters? Well, the porters are the people to whom we owe a lot of our Black Canadian culture, a lot of our contemporary Black Canadian culture, because they not only are at the catalyst of movements that were started, they started some of the first Black unions in North America, for example, because they were not allowed to be part of a union. They actually started their own in 1917 in Winnipeg. Now, what is a porter? Well, the term sleeping car comes from uh, actually, I guess, an innovative way of traveling that was started in the 1860s, 1870s, right after slavery had been abolished in the United States. It was created by George Pullman out of Chicago. And Mr. Pullman, which is a Caucasian man, requested to have black people working on the trains. Now, excuse me, black men working on the trains. Now, when it comes to a sleeping car porter, what does that do? Sleeping car porters obviously carry the luggage, they cook the food, they shine the shoes. Told you guys, right? It's a sleeping car. So they do have people sleeping inside those cars. At times you'd be on the road for days, weeks. So at times they'd have to do the homeworks with the kids, put them to sleep. Again, they have to smile all the time. They're not allowed to have emotions, which is something that still carries, throughout. It's something that's still ongoing. And they would call them George. So let's say you're a porter, you have a name tag. They can clearly see your name is David or Chris, but they would call you George, and you can calmly say, "Oh, thank you very much, man. My name is not George. My name is Chris." They're like, "Oh, okay, okay, no worries, George." So again, a level of dehumanization that made it that even though it was considered, quote unquote, a good job because you had a clean uniform and you get to travel. Um, you're not allowed to be part of a union. So you can lose your job at any given time, at any given time. And the porters went from, they were all connected throughout North America. So we're talking about all the cities that, were mentioned. It could be Toronto, it could be Vancouver, it could be Calgary, it could be, no, it could be Halifax, it could be Montreal, New York, Chicago, New Jersey, so on, Boston, you called it. Most of these black men ended up working as porters because the company Pullman, the Pullman Train Company, requested to have black men only working as porters. So that led to an exit, or that led to a migration of African Americans coming here to Canada to work, looking for better opportunity. Again, also Afro Caribbeans, again, for lack of better opportunity, coming here, and migration movements within Canada. You have uh, from the Maritimes, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, leaving their hometowns and going west to Montreal, to Toronto, to try and find jobs as sleeping car porters. So that led to what I love to call in different communities, whether it be, later on Hogan's Alley in Vancouver, whether it be Amber Valley, whether it be around Bloor and Bathurst in Toronto, whether it be Little Burgundy, whether it be Africa, that led to what I love to call Afro melting pot, where you'd have different black people from different background building small communities, starting institutions, starting churches, starting activism. The porters, through the porters, we've received Marcus Garvey, we received Pan-Africanism in Canada in a lot of different ways. We've received jazz culture, we received nightclubs that were open. So all of that all of that culture is rooted in people wanting to find their place, but people also wanted to occupy the space in ways that they felt was necessary for them because they were not allowed to be part of mainstream society. Um, so obviously, when it comes to the porters, we could spend time in talking about how they impacted Black Canadian history, and like I said, starting some of the first Black Union, being at the root of early activist movements, and again being part-time musicians, starting Black institutions that are still revered to this day. Till this day, they're revered, and also a lot of them happen to be war veterans from World War One and World War Two. Again, we've had professionals, doctors, lawyers. No, it is really, really interesting when it comes to the porters and the work that the job that they did in terms of establishing this Black Canadian contemporary Black Canadian culture, if I may put it like this. And like I said, um, there's much more history that we could have talked about. Maybe we didn't specifically talk about your region, but feel free if you have any questions or comments. It'll be my pleasure to elaborate on anything else that you want to talk about. We didn't talk about the 20th centuries because I felt it was necessary for us to also talk about to understand what took place in the past in order for us to be here today and understand that, on whose shoulders we're standing as people of African descent living in Canada. We have ancestry here for over 400 years, whether our ancestry came directly from Africa, whether they came from the Caribbean or different parts of the world, North America. We need to understand that this is an identity that we need to carry on. And we need to find ways to come together as Black Canadians, people of or Canadians of African descent, Afro Canadians, whether you're Caribbean Canadian and so on. It doesn't really matter because at this point, it's up to us to have this level of understanding and this level of understanding for us to also know what we want to leave as a legacy for the future. Because today was not only about us, reclaiming our history. Today was about us understanding that these people at the time that they were living did not really know that they were making history. Maybe they did, but just by the actions, just by their actions or by their train of thoughts, we got to witness something that now is a legacy for us. So again, if you have any questions, if any comments, please feel free to ask. My name is Rito Joseph. Thank you very much for listening to this little lecture today.
Thank you so much, Rito. So we have a question in the chat right now that says, when you were talking about the porters, how
Mhm.
well, I don't know if you've seen it. Apparently there's a TV series called The Porter that was in 2022. The question
Yeah,
was, how well was the story of the porters reflected in that TV series?
you know what? I'm gonna be honest with you. I have yet to watch the series. I've heard of it. I have yet to have time to really sit down and watch it.
Yeah, I think we have something new to add to our watch list, I guess.
Yeah, I have yet to
Oh,
watch
I haven't
it.
seen it. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. If you have any other questions, you can please post them in the chat or you can raise your hand and unmute and ask your questions. Oh, somebody just watched the Book of Negroes. Yeah,
Nice,
I read
nice.
that book. It was life-changing for me. Yeah.
Haven't watched it either. I don't watch a lot of TV to be honest.
Busy man.
I mostly read. I love to read. I read a
Fair
lot.
enough.
But yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Moshella Short. I'm coming from Halifax. Thank you, Rito. It's so nice to be on the listening end of this. I teach African Canadian study at the college here, and I teach in an ACLO program, which is an Afrocentric Learning Option program. And it's really this incredible thing is happening with my cohort this year where I have newcomers from the motherland, and watching them engage with this information is like, I can't believe I get paid to do this. Like, it's just wonderful. Um, them taking in this information, and
Yeah.
also you can't teach African Canadian studies without talking about the motherland, and so
Yeah.
them reading that information as well and like
Hmm.
engaging with it, it's just, I wish there was a way to share some of the submissions I'm getting from them. I think it's really beautiful when you get to put newcomers from Africa together with our African Nova Scotians, with our African Canadians, and
Hmm.
see the magic that happens there. It's almost like, for me, it's like on an onion falling apart as we go through the year, as I watch them engage with each other and with this information as well. So thank you. I can't wait to take some of this back to them and see what comes of that. But
You're,
really grateful to be here.
you're very welcome. Thanks a lot for your comment. And yeah, I receive it. I think it's also amazing that the work that you do, and we need more people like you. So listen, I'm sending strength and power and courage your way. 'Cause it is not an easy work, but people like such as yourself makes us understand that it not only it's worth it, but it's necessary and needed. And speaking of African Nova Scotians, uh, the Scotians would have been also the first group of people of African descent to go back to Africa. I didn't talk about it, but Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone, the Scotians, and the movements of Black Poors in London in the late 1790s. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but if you guys, there's a book I would recommend to you guys, also known as the Autobiography of Olaudah Equiano. Excuse me. The autobiography of Olaudah Equiano. Olaudah Equiano was an Igbo that was kidnapped in Nigeria. He was sold into slavery in the Caribbean, and then in the United States, and then in the northern states, and then in Louisville in Quebec, and then he ended up in the UK, taught himself how to read and write, and then wrote about his life, and then ended up becoming an activist, abolitionist, guest speaker, and he was part of the people that organized along with the African Nova Scotians to have Black people going back to Sierra Leone. So it's really interesting because nowadays we know about Liberia in the United States, but that happened almost 60 years later, so yeah.
Rito, can you drop the name of that book in the chat for everybody? Somebody just said how to
Yes.
spell the name.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
Perfect. And then we have a question from Manda B. You can go ahead.
Hello, good night. Bonsoir, Rito. Hailing
Bonsoir,
from
Amanda.
Montreal. The sun's in the back, he's always near. My question is that finally in Montreal at Concordia University, they have a course for Black Afro-Canadian. Sorry. Somebody wants to call now. Afro-Canadian history as a minor. And the only information that I have is to register. There's no information about who's teaching the classes, and like where is the information coming from. So I obviously want to know, do you have any hands on deck in there? Are you teaching anything? Do you have any information or who is going to be teaching this?
This is a very good question. I don't have any information on who's going to teach. I'm not sure how, I'm really not sure how they will proceed with the teaching the Afro-Canadian studies at McGill. However, I'm sorry, at Concordia. However, on March 12th, I'm doing a lecture at Concordia if ever you're interested. That's about it. That's all I know, but I have no idea about who's the professor that's going to teach about that kind of history.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
We have a question. Thank you, Amanda. We have a question in the chat that says, how can a solo person do your walking tours?
How can a solo person do my walking tours? Well, when I have public tours, when you come to Montreal between spring and fall, I'll have walking tours, and I'm going to put the link in order for you to register. You can register and come do the tours.
Amazing. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I actually have a question myself, because I know you were speaking about how we have Black Canadians who have been here for hundreds of years, but then we have a lot of immigrants who started to come in from the Caribbean. I want to say like the 50s or the 60s.
Yep.
What happened there, and why was there such a large influx of people from the Caribbean?
In 1955, there was a domestic scheme, right? They had a lot of Caribbean, a lot of young girls, a lot of young women from the Caribbean coming to work here as domestics. And they were promised that, after 1 year, they get the PR, permanent residence, and then they get to, work and go to school. However, a lot of them were trapped because after years, not only they were not given permanent residence, they had to work, they had to still keep working as domestics. And also, I would say in the 50s, the politics of Canada would have been more of it would have been more from a British landscape. So this would have feel like moving from one British, I guess one part of the British Empire to another. And so that led to a lot of people from the Caribbean came here to study and then afterwards, you know, opportunities came. But then at some point, they came here because they wanted them to stay. For it's a multi-layered, right? It's a multi-layered for multiple reasons. We've had a lot of Caribbean people coming here in the 50s, but I would say that the domestic scheme of 1955 was definitely one of them.
That makes sense. Someone in the chat said, "Is that the Canadian equivalent to the wind rush?"
Good question. Somewhat. Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, everything is linked, right? Because it is linked to the wind rush in a lot of different ways. Yeah. But the wind rush was also it was even more flagrant because even as of recently, you had people that have been in the UK like their whole lives and now they're considered non-citizen. It's kind of crazy that, you know, they tried to deport them. So that was imagine, like, leaving Jamaica in 1947 with your mother, and then you arrived in the UK at 3 years old, and now you're in your 70s and they're telling you, oh yeah, you know what, you're not a citizen, we'll have to deport you. So the wind rush situation was very critical lately. But yeah, it definitely has similarities.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. Does anybody else have questions they would like to add? We'll give it a minute.
I'm sorry I'm not using the chat. My keyboard's not working.
No, we love to hear, you know, speaking is even better. So
Okay, good.
blessing guys.
My question is, like, I think it's really great to know our history. I think it's necessary that we know all of this, but especially here in Nova Scotia, there is such a divide between our Black folks. Like, how can we use this history to create routes that brings us together now? Black folks that are here in Canada, that whether we're newcomers, whether we've been here for a while, or like the folks, African Nova Scotians who've been here for over 400 years, there's a divide that's really hindering our progress as a people. How can we use all this knowledge of our history and what we've gone through and all the things that unite us so that we can build stronger bonds, regardless of where in the diaspora we hail?
That is a very good question. I think that once we know what we know, we have a responsibility, right? And it's up to us, people such as ourselves, to be intentional about, you know, not just bringing the people together, but spread a message of unity and positivity, right? Because us being divided is part of the colonial project. Us speaking different languages is part of the colonial project. Obviously, yeah, even if it wasn't for the colonial project, we'd speak our languages. But what I'm saying is that us feeling or thinking that, you know, we need, and when I say coming together, it doesn't mean that we all have to think the same. It doesn't mean that we have to see things the same, but we have to understand the environment. We have to have a level of understanding of who we are, what we want, and how we want to move within the space. And I think not understanding how we want to move within the space makes it that at times we feel it can only be us or them. And it doesn't have to be like that, because our forefathers did come together for many reasons in order for us to be here today. And for me, I feel, because what you're talking about, I see it, but I also see the other side of the coin. I see people from, you know, continental Africa, Western Africa, Eastern Africa, you know, coming together. I see people from the Caribbean, English speaking Caribbean, the French speaking Caribbean, Spanish, Portuguese, coming together. I see people from different parts of, you know, I guess the local geopolitics coming together because they understand that it's strength in numbers. So I think for us right now, it's about, and again, I know it sounds like, you know, it sounds easy the way I'm saying it, but it's not easy, but it's necessary. And it's about us really coming together and making sure that regardless of what's happening, regardless of what, you know, the people that want to be part of this divisiveness, we have to leave them. We have to leave them alone. And we have to have the like-minded people coming together and build something of substance, in my opinion, of course.
We have a hand raised from Clyde. You can go ahead.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. And first, thank you, brother, for your presentation. Just
Bless,
going
bless.
off of what you talked about, you mentioned it briefly, but I just wanted you, could you talk a little bit more about the Garvey movement in Canada? You talked about it coming up with the Porters, and it kind of connects to what you just mentioned just now about different folks coming together.
Yeah, the Garvin movement arrived in Canada through Caribbean people in 1917, right? So in Montreal and afterwards Toronto. So the Caribbean people that were part of the Garvey movement here actually. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Garvey, but Garvey used to live in Costa Rica and Panama before he like made it to Harlem. And a lot of Caribbean folks went to, Panama to work on the canal, right? So while Garvey was there, he had started, I guess, the UNIA, unofficial UNIA, and a lot of Caribbean followers from Grenada, Trinidad, Jamaica, and so on were there as well. So some of those workers ended up coming to Canada, Montreal, Toronto, and they're the ones that brought Garvey in. And those Caribbean men as well also ended up working as porters. So that also opened an activist movement that was through Pan-Africanism. So that is also really interesting because when we think of Garvey, we think that maybe, it started in Harlem and then it came here. It was in Costa Rica and Panama. Then it went to Harlem, and then from Harlem it came here. But the connection from here in Canada and Garvey started before Garvey went to Harlem.
And it's even really important for this year, it's Malcolm's centennial, and his
That's
parents
it.
in
And
Montreal.
his
Mother was
mother, exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And you know what's really interesting in what you said is that Malcolm X's mother came to Montreal to live with her uncle Edgerton, and Edgerton Langdon happened to be one of those workers that work on the canal. He was there, and he was part of the people that co-organizers that made sure that Garvey would come to Montreal. So it's really interesting because when she arrived here, that's how she met Earl. She met Earl through Garveyism and the UNIA that was established in Montreal. So it came the first time in 1917 and came throughout the 20s. And then even when he was deported from the United States, spent a lot of time staying in Toronto and, transiting to Montreal and then to Halifax. Nowadays, we know redemption song from Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can feel. Those words were spoken by Garvey while he was in Canada, while he was in Nova Scotia.
Thank you for that, brother.
You're welcome, my brother. You're welcome.
All right. So I want to move into, we were going to do, oh, no, we have a question from Jasmine. Go ahead.
It took a little while to actually do that. So I wanted to thank you, first of all, because I feel like going through the school systems in Canada growing up, like you don't know, like there are a few things that are familiar to me that were mentioned today, but there's not, like I learned more today about Canadian history than I have like growing up in Canada my whole life. Or Black Canadian history. I don't remember if I said that. But I am actually an education student, and part of the reason why I wanted to take this, join this masterclass, is that I wanted to be able to, like Medicine Hat is a primarily like very white city, and we're a very small city, and it just feels like I hear a lot of people who are very ignorant about what Black History Month is, and I think it's important to I guess, get those kids who are growing up and get them and teach them what it is actually about, and not the whole like, why do they get a whole month thing that I hear from a lot of people. So I was wondering if you had any like suggestions on how, like what the best way is to, I guess, educate a primarily white community in high school, I guess, on Black history or Canadian Black history, especially.
That is a very good question. We can only educate the people that want to be educated. I don't think we can force education on the ones that don't want. However, I think someone such as yourself, because you have this level of consciousness and you see what's happening, you need to find like-minded people in different fields and see how you guys can put something, together. and you're going to meet a lot of resistance. You're going to meet a lot of people who probably won't even believe that what you're doing is righteous. However, that's the reason why I say find like-minded people, is that there needs to be a purpose, and the purpose could be about educating, but at the same time, I think it's also about, raising awareness as to, how people see themselves and what people think they know. And for example, right, when I talk about Black Canadian history, I love to talk about Black Canadian history, but what I tell people all the time is that, yes, we do call it Black Canadian history, but first and foremost, it is Canadian history. And you know what? I go even deeper than that. It is just history. But because you see it as something foreign, we put Black Canadian history, so we teach it as something that only belongs to Black people. However, if we were to understand that, Canada is a settlers country, we'd understand that this is Canadian history and this is part of our ongoing struggle as Canadians. And many people here feel that, when it comes to Black History Month, it has to do with, what's happening in the United States, but really, it has to do with Black people all over the world. And yeah, I think it's educating the people that you feel like this message would reach, but also, yeah, finding like-minded people so the message can go across in different ways, and then also, a multi-layered message as well. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
No,
I
I
tried
think
my
that's a good answer. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, into the chat, I've put a link where it is an interactive slide type of thing where it's just 3 questions that we're going to answer today. But the first question, so the point of this part is to bring it into present day. So Rito talked a lot about the history and educating it, but we want to know what's going on today and what we're seeing. So we know that Black Canadians have been present. We know we have a deep, rich, and turbulent history. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about what type of youth-led initiatives that we can do to continue propelling Black Canadians forward. So I started us off by putting a youth-led initiative that I've seen in my community where it's called a student vote, where students come together in schools and they learn about the different parties that exist in their city. And then they actually have a mock vote election to teach them about the importance of voting. I think that this would be a great initiative to see done for Black youth as well, because it's so important that we vote, because the policies that come in directly affect us, and a lot of youth don't have that connection necessarily. So I see 2 people are typing, but if you also want to say out loud any other youth-led initiatives that you've seen in your community, that you think that are already happening and targeting Black youth, or that you think would be beneficial, please feel free to share.
Again, I can't type.
Talk to us, don't worry.
So humbling. So a few years ago, I worked with a youth art organization, and again, with my strong desire to see, especially our youth, connect with Black folks across the diaspora. We created this. It was completely virtual, and I have to tell you, I think it cost us altogether maybe $500. But we connected two youth here from Nova Scotia, 2 from Ghana, 2 from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and 2 from Zimbabwe. And they came together for over 6 weeks and learned about each other. And as they learned about each other, they had to create an end product. And they created a children's book. But it started with just giving them words like pumpkin. And what does pumpkin mean to you here? What does it mean to someone in St. Vincent? And then it got them talking about grandparents and cooking and food. And it was so incredible to watch, because as they were learning about each other, they were learning about themselves. And I'd love to see programs like this happen, like even in our high schools. Like this was with artists, young artists, like some of them were writers, some of them were in digital creation. But I think it's the sort of thing that could work in high schools, elementary schools, any sort of groups that want to understand themselves better and the people that they're connected to.
Yeah, that's really amazing. How did you connect with the youth in Ghana and the youth in St. Vincent?
So I'm a children's book author, and when I wrote my children's book, which is about encouraging Black folks to love themselves in the skin they're in, it's a book I wrote really to teach my daughter never to stop looking at herself with joy in her eyes. And then they reached out to me at that time. They were creating content for an online children's content. And in talking with them, we were like, we want to do this thing where we're connecting young people. And so then I'm originally from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, so I reached out to a youth organization there. And then we had a colleague from Zim, and so we connected with them as well.
Wow, that's amazing. My mom's also from St. Vincent. That's why I was like, oh,
Really?
yeah. I'm like, that's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a fantastic initiative. I would love to see that replicated again. Um,
Yeah, I can even share with you some of the content with they ended up with two products that I can share. But for the education student that was talking before, I think there's so much online. There's so many ways to connect now. I just encourage you to sort of use that passion you have because what is her name? Betty, the oldest ranger in the US. She said something incredible about history. She said history, as it was experienced, is so much more interesting and so much more intricate than what it's told about it. And then, so if you go from that point, students are naturally curious. But if we go with, I'm going to give you this incredible information about, our history, then I think that could be your win.
Nice. And shameless plug, drop the link for your book in the chat as well. I would love to see it. So in our Slido, we have somebody who said that here in Ottawa, we have established a community library on African world history. It's called the Lukasa Library and is located in our Sankofa African history courses, which run every Saturday. That's amazing. That's fantastic that that's happening in Ottawa. I don't know if the person who typed this wants to come on to talk a little bit about the courses that run on Saturday, but I would love to hear that.
That was me. Yeah, we for the past 7 years since I've been in, I can't. So my name is Clyde Ledbetter. I'm a professor of African and African American studies. I'm from the States originally. Family's from Guinea, and I came to Ottawa about 7 years ago and didn't know anybody but my wife's family. But when I came, I said, I'm a teacher. I know how to teach, and if you give me the space, I can teach African history classes for the community for free. And I've been doing that for 7 years. And I'm at the same time working with youth, giving them skills to presentation skills. So they teach in the class, they help run the Zoom because it's a in-person and a virtual session every Saturday. They help create the course websites that hold the material. And this year, our initiative was to start a community library where we're asking folks to donate books and on African world history, so we can have a space that's really run by the youth. The high school students are running this initiative. I kind of started it. I donated 100 of my books just because I'm trying to clear out, but to get us started. But the youth run the entire thing. They run the social media campaign. They're running all of that. And they have ideas for what they want this library to be, a place for debate, a place where youth can come together to learn, to get skills on instructing, all that type of thing. So that's what we're doing here. We've been doing it for a while in terms of the classes. We got all types of courses. Right now, we're running a course on African world history from 711 to 1896. We do a course on sheroes every fall. A course on early history, the African Renaissance, which runs from May to June, so it's 1896 to the present. This year, we're having a whole class in May on Malcolm X for the centennial. Done classes on something similar to what was presented tonight. We did this year from December to January called "What to the African is Canada." We went through a lot of the same history, so I was glad that I could check myself against what the brother presented to make sure that we wasn't too far off. So we did all right. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell, and got a lot of youth involvement, and we're training them up to take our place.
Yeah, that's amazing. Is it primarily high school students?
High school students are the ones that are in the program learning to teach, but the audience is for anybody middle school and up. So we got elders, young people, we got folks since it's Zoom, we got people from outside the country that come in and watch. So everybody's invited. It's free. There's a free course website associated with it. We can get all the resources, videos, and book chapters and articles, things I take from the university and just give them out for free because ain't no reason to spend thousands of dollars to get something that you could get for free.
That's amazing. Yeah, if you can drop the link to that in the chat as well, we would love to include it in the recap email that we send out after the event. Okay, another one says that dance programming that encourages us to embody our culture and traditions. I think that's really important, especially considering how integral like music and dance and moving our body is to Black history. We have the Accelerate Durham pitch hosted by Nabellum in partnership with the town of Ajax, Ontario, Canada, which supports Black entrepreneurs in Durham. It offered a $10,000 prize to innovative startups in STEM, providing resources, exposure, and community support. That's amazing. Nobellum always does fantastic work. We partner with them a lot, and I know that their events are always amazing. They always have the coolest businesses that they get people to pitch about. Another one says, I've performed at universities and primary schools in Ontario with my West African drumming group, where we shared African traditions through storytelling, rhythms, and their cultural significance. Again, that's really amazing that you're able to go around and share that culture and the cultural significance of that. Okay, I think because we're cutting it close on time that we're gonna move to the next slide. So this is just talking about, can I close this one? To the next one, okay. So if you could build a national network of youth working on similar issues, what tools, systems, or supports would be necessary to help you collaborate effectively across different provinces and territories? So one thing that I have reflected on is that I think that Black youth need somewhere where they can congregate and they can just actually get together. I think that so many virtual things happened during COVID that I think it's even more important now to have those in-person like ability for them to interact with each other. And so I think it would be really cool. The same thing that I'm sorry, the previous I can't remember her name now, but the previous speaker was talking about where she connected youth from different countries. I think it would be even cool to connect Black youth from different provinces because my experience in Toronto was probably so vastly different than a Black youth's experience in Edmonton, right? And so it would be cool to come together and have a space for us or even a platform to connect. But if you wanted to put anything in the chat, feel free to add to our board. I'll give people a couple minutes to add to that. Or you can make comments if you want as well.
Me again. Um, I had the honor of getting to run a workshop at the National Black Summit. I think that was like 2 years ago already, maybe. Um, but I'll tell you something, it was so incredible. I did a writing workshop for the Black youth, and they they're doing such incredible things on their own. They almost don't need us. They're not waiting around for people to give them space at their tables. They're building their own tables and doing things. So I think it's what they need is for us to say, to recognize them. What they need is that some validation, like we see you, we see what you're doing. They need us to champion them and celebrate them. I think that they already know how to gather. They already know what's important and what they want to work at. It's just for us to start to recognize that and give them their flowers, really. I'm every day impressed when I get to work with young people, Black youth are they're already changing the world. Like I'm telling you, they're already doing phenomenal things. and we just need to use our platforms to highlight that.
Mhm.
That's my thought on it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I love that you said that they just need our recognition, because sometimes that support, it makes all the difference in just continuing to do all the things you're doing. 100%. Okay, so I see a couple people typing, so I'll give a minute if anybody's going to add anything, but if not, we can hop on to the last question that we have.
I just have one thing I want to say.
Mhm.
In terms of the national network, and this is, my humble opinion. I think, because as Black Canadians, we don't often have a lot of reasons to come together. However, I think if we were to have a national holiday like Emancipation Day, August 1st, and we were to choose a city every year, a different city every year, and we congregate to that city every year, every year, we could go to Ottawa, we could go to Toronto, we could go to Montreal, we could go to Halifax, Calgary, Edmonton, Quebec City, like Victoria, Vancouver. Think about it, you know, yeah, St. John's, New Brunswick. Yep, we have every year for the next 2, 3, 4, 5,000, 100 years. We go to one city, we congregate, and we build every year, which means this is
Love that.
ongoing.
And I love a good party too, so it
Because
would
you see what I mean? Because don't get me wrong, our forefathers, they partied together. They had a good time. They congregated. And
Exactly.
this is part of culture, It's like
Yes.
it
Yeah.
could be like, I don't know, maybe in daytime, yes, we do talk about, all the issues, and in the evening we have a good time. We dance, we laugh, we share, we eat once a
100%.
year. Once a
Somebody
year.
said that we need a way to converge the progress made in the many provinces to make sure any updates can be seen from each province. I think that's a great point as well. When I
Mhm.
started working previously to me working at the Federation of Black Canadians, I did a lot of work in the Black community, but only within the GTA. So I didn't know. Then when I started working with the Federation of Black Canadians and I was seeing that there's organizations all across Canada who are doing this work, I was stunned. Like my world expanded. So I agree with this for sure. The other one says that money, professional development and mentorship, space, equitable access to technology for virtual engagement. Absolutely. Second that
Mhm.
for sure. Okay, I'm going to move on to the third question, which is what is one concrete step that can be taken in the next 3 months to activate spaces for youth in your community? How can you ensure long-term impact beyond this initial action? So my first comment to this is that working in the not-for-profit space and the way that funding goes, I've run fantastic programs that happen one time and then the funding is done and then that's it. That program doesn't run again. So I think that the access to funding that somebody said in the previous question is extremely important. But also, I think the national network as well, because sometimes you don't always have to reinvent the wheel, but you can come together with somebody who's already doing something and together you can go further. And so we've done that a lot at FBC as well. When we're running national programs, we partner up with organizations who are already doing the work and we try and provide them with funding so that they can reach those objectives way better than we could coming from the outside in. I see 2 people are typing, so I'll wait for some responses.
Is it normal that I don't see the responses on the screen?
Oh, can you guys see my screen?
Nope.
Huh.
I mean, I don't. Maybe
Oh,
everybody else does.
can you see it now?
Oh,
No way. Sometimes there's like a second tab you have to click that's like Federation of Black Canadians screen.
I see
Perfect.
it now. Thank you.
Oh, okay, awesome. Advertisement of programs. Yeah, there are many ongoing supports in Ontario that provide funding and learning opportunities, but are not advertised well. Yeah, for sure. vote in Ontario, advocate during the selection year at each level of government, encourage public-private partnerships, engage local businesses. Agreed. I think we all need to vote. Tomorrow's election day in Ontario, later this year's election in Canada. I think that that is so important. 100% agree. Okay, so I will stop sharing my screen here. I'll pass it off to Rito to kind of tie all of this together, and then I'll have a couple of closing remarks and we'll let everyone go.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Raquel. Thanks a lot to the FBC also for, choosing me to, share some of this knowledge with you guys. I'm always honored to, because it's my way of, trying to be part of the solution. And I think that, as Black Canadians or people of African descent, whether regardless of what we want to call ourselves, we have a responsibility. And when I say being part of the solution, think of it like, let's say we have a building, right? Or let's say we have a church or whatever you want to call it. We have a community center. They're the people that, clean up space. They're the people that, do the activities. They're the people that organize. They're the people that come to be part of the activities. And we each have a role to play. All right. You go somewhere, it's clean. Well, it makes you want to go back, but this is the janitor's work. This is that person caring enough that, okay, me being part of the solution is me cleaning the spot. So whenever you come here, you have somewhere to stay, you have somewhere to clear your mind because it's clean, right? So I think for us, as wanting to be part of the solution, we need to understand the role that we want to play within, you want to call it a movement, you want to call it organization. We need to understand who we are within the space. And to understand who you are within the space, you need to be rooted. You need to be rooted in some sort of understanding of your environment. That's how you occupy space, because occupying space has to be intentional. Otherwise, you're just loitering. And it's really funny. The amount of times I was told you're loitering. But yes, because when you're loitering, you don't know where you're headed. You're just walking for the sake of walking. And when you're intentional, when you have somewhere to go, you're on a journey, you're on a path. Can nobody tell you you're loitering? They see you walking and they can't even stop you from, going to where you're supposed to go. So I think for us right now, we want to figure out, despite everything we saw, despite everything we've been throughout everything we saw, I think right now for us is to figure out what is the role that we want to play. And this role, it's us wanting to be part of the solution, but understand this is a Sankofa, right? So this is taking it from the past and moving it forward. This is us understanding that this role, this we're standing on people's shoulder, but we're also paving a way as we're walking in our journey, in our purpose. And walking in your purpose, sometimes it doesn't mean that you'll be the person that's going to, liberate the people. It doesn't mean that you'll be Moses, but you could be Aaron, or you can be someone that, walked that, throughout the sea. You can be someone that was part of everything, that recorded everything. You can be someone that helped. You can be someone that helped, someone that sheltered. You can be someone that saw someone at a station and you gave them a ride. So I think for us right now, it's understanding the space that we want to make for the younger generations, the generations to come, because we do have a responsibility, even if we don't have children. If you do have children, if you don't have children, our responsibility stays because we're future ancestors. And as future ancestors, we need to make sure that the future generations understand what our purpose is and was in this day and age. And in order for us to understand our purpose, we need to be rooted. In order to be rooted, we need to do the inward journey. And doing the inward journey will help us understanding how we want to go about being in the space, because the space is not new. Maybe some of the tools now are new. Maybe the environment feels new, but the space is the same. And we understand that there's divisions, there is division. We understand everything that's at stake, but we need to understand us first and foremost. And I think right now, today, we're here on the chat. I'm pretty sure, a lot of people have a lot of things to do. I mean, listen, this is Western society. You never have nothing to do. Even if you don't do nothing, you always have something to do, somewhere to go, something to watch, something to eat, something to see. So I think right now we're here because we are intentional about wanting to find some sort of solution. And the solution is us being here is the first step to a solution for the greater good, because the individual work that we do will affect the collectiveness, and the collective work will have a positive impact on us as individuals.
Thank you so much, Rito. I completely agree with everything. Okay, so lastly, before I let everybody go, I have one shameless plug for the Federation of Black Canadians. So we have something that's called our Black Builders Network, and it is a Black business and nonprofit resource hub. So it is a paid membership where you join and you get access to webinars with industry professionals, we send out funding lists of funds that you can apply for. We have exclusive networking events and discounts and giveaways. There's a lot of value in this. So if you know somebody who has a small business or a not-for-profit, a grassroots organization who could benefit, this would be a great opportunity. So on a last note, I want to thank everybody so much for coming. If you have any links or any way that you want to stay connected, please put it in the chat and we will send out an event recap that includes the recording and then all of the different things that we talked about and the different links that were posted. We really appreciate you taking the time and participating and being open and willing to learn. That curiosity is always what's going to keep pushing our community forward. So yeah, happy Black History Month and enjoy the rest of your evening. It was lovely meeting all of you, and thank you again to Rito. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Until next time.